Hello, friends. I'm glad to see you on my channel. Today I want to share with you a real story that happened to me. It's something I've been silent about for a long time, but maybe it's time to tell you everything. Sometimes in life, situations happen that not only change your perception of the world, but also help you understand how blind we can sometimes be to what is happening around us. So, here we go. I have always believed that the perfect evening is not an expensive restaurant or an exotic trip, but an opportunity to spend time together. That's why I decided to have a romantic dinner at home. Everything was perfect: dim lights, candles, her favorite dish that I had been cooking for almost an hour. A bottle of expensive wine that I had bought especially for this evening. I had even prepared a small gift, a beautiful bracelet that she had wanted for a long time, but for some reason hadn't dared to buy. This evening I wanted to remind us both that despite our work, fatigue and everyday worries, we are still the same people who once fell in love with each other. I put the plates away, checked that the food was warm enough, and looked in the mirror again to make sure I looked good. All day I was waiting for this moment, anticipating how she would come in, be surprised and smile happily, but everything went completely wrong. She came late. Very late. I was starting to worry and even thought about calling her. But I refrained from doing so. I didn't want to look too intrusive. Finally, I heard the door lock click and quickly ran to the entrance to meet her. She walked in without looking up. I immediately noticed that she looked tired, but not the usual tiredness after a long day at work. It was a different kind of tiredness, not physical, but emotional. I wanted to hug her, but she just mumbled, "I'm terribly tired," and walked past me. I froze in place, still holding the gift. "I made dinner," I said, trying not to let the disappointment show in my voice. She didn't even stop. She just threw it over her shoulder, "I'm not hungry." Only then did I notice that she didn't even look at the table, didn't smell her favorite dish, didn't see how hard I tried. I stood there, watching her disappear into the bedroom, and couldn't shake the strange feeling. Something was wrong. Very wrong. She had never acted like this before. Even on the hardest days, she would at least try to smile or tell me what happened. And this time, she just disappeared behind the door, not even mentioning that we were supposed to spend the evening together. I stood there for a few more minutes, trying to find a logical explanation. But the feeling I hated the most was already brewing inside me: doubt. I didn't know what was happening. But I knew for sure that this was just the beginning. The next day I woke up before she did. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, and replayed last night in my head. I never waited for her to leave the room. At night, when I finally went to bed, she was already sleeping with her back to me, somehow wary, as if she didn't want me to touch her even accidentally. I asked myself, maybe I'm just imagining things? Maybe she had a really hard day, but another part of me couldn't shake the uneasy feeling. I got up and went to the kitchen. Dinner was still untouched. Even the wine hadn't been opened. I sighed and poured myself a cup of coffee, trying to start the day as usual. But it was no longer normal. Later in the afternoon, I received a message. The number was unknown. "You should know what's going on behind your back." I froze. Something inside me snapped, even though I didn't even realize what it was about. It was like standing on the edge of a cliff and feeling like the ground was about to give way. Before I could react, I received another message: "You can see for yourself. Here is the address." And indeed, there was an address. The neighborhood was familiar to me, but this particular street said nothing. I didn't know what to think. Was this a joke? Did someone decide to troll me? Or, I felt a cold sweat break out on my back. If it was true, who was this stranger? And how does he know me? I couldn't concentrate on anything else. The phone seemed heavier than usual. I opened the chat again, reread the messages, trying to find some clue in them. Why am I even considering this? This is all so crazy, but, despite everything, the thought that it had something to do with her never left me. She really was acting strange, too strange. I looked at the address again, and suddenly I realized what I had to do. I told myself that I would just go there, have a look, and come back. No stage, no drama, no jumping to conclusions. All the way to that address, I tried to calm myself down with logic. This is stupid. Maybe it's just a mistake. Or someone is playing a strange game with me. But if I really believed these words, why was I gripping the steering wheel so hard that my fingers were white? When I drove up, I immediately felt everything inside me tense up. It was an ordinary apartment building. Old brick, a slightly shabby entrance, narrow windows with curtains. The kind of house that doesn't attract attention but hides a lot of other people's stories. I turned off the car. Leaving my hands on the steering wheel, I waited. Maybe this is the moment when I should just drive away. Forget about it, put it out of my mind. But then the door of the house opened, and out she came, my wife. My heart seemed to slow down. She quickly went down the stairs, looking around. She looked tense. She was carrying a bag I didn't recognize, and she was not alone. A man was walking next to her. I had never seen him before. He was not very tall, dark-haired, with an unshaven chin and a hood pulled almost over his eyes. They exchanged a few words. Then they went in different directions. She got into her car and drove away. He stayed there for a few more seconds, then quickly walked in the opposite direction. I felt my stomach tighten. Who was he? What was she doing in that house? And most importantly, why was she lying to me? When she returned home that evening, I behaved calmly. Although everything was boiling inside, I knew I couldn't let my emotions get the better of me. I prepared dinner as usual. I asked her how her day was. She smiled tiredly. Oh, I had a lot to do at work. And this long meeting. I could barely lift my head. I could feel the blood draining from my face. She said it so easily, so casually. Without even thinking, I looked at her more closely. Before, I would have just nodded and believed her. But now I knew the truth. I had seen her there. Not in the office, not at the meeting. She was in that house. And with that man. I took a sip of water, trying not to give myself away. How did the meeting go? I asked. She looked up and answered easily. As usual, nothing interesting. The boss was boring, my colleagues were yawning. The same as always. My hands clenched into fists under the table. A lie. Her lie fell apart in a second. I could have just said, I know you weren't at work. But I didn't. Instead, I said, that sounds tiring. I guess you need to unwind somehow. Huh? She smiled again, not even realizing that I had seen everything. But now I knew for sure, she was hiding something big. And I had to find out what. I couldn't just sit there and wait for her to tell me everything. It wouldn't work. She had already lied, and she would most likely continue to lie. I decided to act and find out the truth myself. The next day, when she left for work, I went back to that house. I don't know what I expected to see. Maybe that man, maybe some clue that would explain what was going on. But when I got to the door and saw that it was locked, something made me look through the window. The apartment was almost empty. Only a few things. A mattress on the floor, empty water bottles, some bags, no personal belongings. Not a hint that anyone lived here. It looked like a temporary shelter. Who needed it? And most importantly, why did my wife have anything to do with it? My mind immediately drew the worst possible scenarios: smuggling, drugs, or something even worse. I returned home, and there was only one thought in my head. I still didn't know who that man was, so I started looking. and this is what I found: I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong with this situation. She was lying to me, it was obvious. But the question was, why? I didn't believe it was just an innocent secret or some kind of surprise. Her behavior, her nervousness, this apartment with almost empty rooms, all of it made sense in only one way: she was hiding something very serious. I returned home, sat down on the couch and tried to think things through logically. First, she was lying about where she was. This is a fact. Second, she was meeting with a man I had never met. They looked worried. A third, the apartment looked abandoned, but there were enough things to realize that someone had lived there. Not just visiting for an hour or two, but living there. My heart was pounding as I thought about the worst. If it had been a lover, she would most likely have covered her tracks differently. But this man didn't look like someone she was in a relationship with. He looked confused, even scared. Who was he? Why was she so determined to hide his existence? I tried to remember everything she had said in the past weeks. Were there any hints? Was there anything that could explain this situation? And suddenly I remembered one thing. About 2 weeks ago, she received a strange call. I walked into the kitchen and heard what she said into the phone. "This is impossible. You know it's impossible." And then, noticing me, she quickly ended the conversation and said it was a colleague from work. But then there was something disturbing in her voice. Could it be the same man? I couldn't sit idly by any longer. I picked up her old cell phone, which was in the drawer of her desk, and started looking for it. She hadn't used it for a long time, but there were still some messages. I looked through her contacts until I came across one of the numbers with no name. I opened the last conversation. There were only 3 messages. I got out. "I have nowhere to go. You're the only one who can help." My pulse started to speed up. You got out? What did that mean? Nowhere to go? Help with what? My heart sank as I realized that it could only mean one thing. This man was out of prison, and she was helping him. I suddenly felt the room become stuffy. Who was he to her? Why did she agree to help him? My heart wanted to believe in the best, but my mind was drawing the worst-case scenarios. I knew one thing: I had to get answers, and I got them that very night. I sat in the living room, twirling the phone in my hands, and didn't know what to do. The feeling that you don't know what's going on in your own life, that there is a person next to you who is hiding something so big that they are even afraid to look you in the eye, this feeling drove me crazy. But if it's true, if this man really got out of prison, who is he to her? I didn't know her family well. She rarely talked about them because she didn't grow up in a very good family. Her mother left them when she was a child, and her father. She didn't like to talk about him. I only knew that he passed away a few years ago and that he was not a good person. Did she have any brothers or sisters? I never heard her mention anyone in particular. But maybe she just didn't want to talk about it. I couldn't wait any longer. When she came home, I was already standing at the kitchen door, arms crossed over my chest. She had just taken off her jacket when I asked, "Where have you been?" She looked up and froze for a moment. "At work," she answered almost automatically, but her voice was tense. I took a step closer. "Really?" She sized me up with her eyes, as if trying to figure out what I knew. "What are you trying to say? I think you're lying to me." She pressed her lips together as if fighting with herself. I took out my phone and opened the message. "Did he write to you?" I asked, showing her the screen. Her face changed. Her eyes widened and she sucked in a sharp breath. "You went through my phone?" "In your old phone," I corrected. "And only because you left me a choice: either I find the truth myself or you tell me." She turned away abruptly, ran her hand through her hair, and took a deep breath. "It's not what you think. What is it then?" I stepped even closer, feeling anger overwhelm me. She fell silent. "It's my brother," she finally said. "He just came out." My brother. My brain tried to digest this information. why didn't you ever mention him?" She turned to me, and her eyes were a mixture of anger and pain. "Because I was ashamed of him." She walked past me and sat down at the table with her head down. "We haven't talked to him for a long time," she continued. "He went to prison when I was 18. At the time, I was just trying to get out of the house, to get away from all this horror. He was no better than our father. He was always involved in some dark deeds. What was he in prison for?" She closed her eyes and was silent for a moment. "For robbery." I was silent, trying to figure out how to react to this. "Why is he out now?" "For good behavior." Her voice sounded bitter. I rubbed my face with my hands. "And now you're helping him?" She pressed her lips together and nodded. "He has no one but me." I could feel the irritation building inside me. "And you decided to hide this from me? How was I supposed to tell you?" She looked up at me. "Oh, by the way, I have a brother who is a criminal, whom I never told you about, and now he lives in a rented apartment because he has nowhere to go?" I didn't say anything. She clenched her hands into fists. "I didn't want you to look at me differently. It's not about that." I shook my head. "It's about trust." She looked down. "I know," I sighed, trying to calm down. "So, what do we do now?" She looked confused. "I don't know." I felt my insides go cold. "Are you going to keep helping him?" She pressed her lips together. "He's my brother. He's a criminal," I reminded her. She closed her eyes. "He's changed." "What if he hasn't?" Silence fell between us. I realized that this evening had changed everything, but I had no idea how much. The next day I couldn't forget what I had seen. I was already on the verge of betrayal, secrets, deception. So, without hesitation, I picked up her phone while she was out and started checking. I didn't feel like a bad person. I was just looking for answers to questions that were bothering me. And what I found was even more of a shock. Her bank statements showed amounts of money transferred, large amounts, to accounts I had never seen. At first I thought they might be her family's accounts or accounts related to her work. But when I started to check carefully, I realized that was not the case. There were transfers to certain private individuals. These were not just unknown people, they were people I had nothing to do with. Even worse, one of the accounts was under the name of some woman I had never heard of. I tried to pretend that nothing had happened, but I realized that everything in her life was not what I had imagined. She was in debt, and this money was probably connected to people who were engaged in the same dangerous activities that I had been guessing about for so long. She obviously tried to hide it from me because she didn't want me to know that she had such dark connections. I sat there and just looked at these statements, trying to figure out what to do next. Questions were running through my head. Why didn't she tell me about all this? How deeply was she involved in all these schemes? And most importantly, why didn't I even suspect this before? My heart was beating faster. I couldn't sit there without doing something. I couldn't just stay silent and pretend that everything was fine. I decided to act. When I gathered all the facts, there was no doubt that I was on the verge of a catastrophe. I realized that she had always been capable of all this, and even more. She was in debt, working with people I could not even imagine. It turned out that she was using my name to cover up her affairs. She wasn't just hiding it all, she was involving me in her problems until I couldn't realize it. Her brother was just the tip of the iceberg. All these money transfers, mysterious people who appeared in her life, all this was connected to large debts. And she was using me to avoid responsibility. How could I not see this before? I asked myself over and over again. It was a big fraudulent scheme and I was part of it without even knowing. What I found out not only destroyed my relationship with her, but also made me wonder if I was actually deceived or if I just didn't want to see what was right in front of me. And was I entitled to something more? I gathered all the evidence and decided to leave her. It was hard, but I knew it was the only way out. I couldn't live in this lying world anymore, even if she had once been an ideal for me. I left her. It wasn't easy. I still loved her, despite everything that had happened, and it was hard to believe that she could be capable of all this. But when I realized that her life was built on lies and manipulation, I couldn't stay, but the biggest shock was yet to come. A year after we broke up, I learned that she had fled the country. The people she had worked with continued to search for her, and now for me. Only now I realized that I was not just a victim of her deception, but part of something much bigger than I could have imagined. She had run away from her debts and the people she was involved with, but now these people realized that I had been with her all along, and I had become part of their game. They were looking for me because I could be their target, because of my connections to her. I sat in silence, watching my life change. And now I had one question: can I really escape from all this? Thank you to everyone who watched this video. I hope that my story was useful and you were able to learn something important for yourself. If you liked it, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. And also write your thoughts in the comments. I am always happy to read your opinion. Take care, and see you soon.